The rain hit like 1,000 dull pins on the windshield, smearing the courthouse steps into streaks of gray. Sarah Nolan sat behind the wheel in the dim light of evening, knuckles white around a cardboard box with her life folded into it. Framed ultrasound, 2 mugs, a bundle of pens bound by a rubber band, and the worn photograph of her mother she kept in the top drawer. The battery light on her dashboard winked stubbornly red. She had lost her job at noon, her boss avoiding her eyes, saying what everyone said now: cost-cutting, restructuring, sorry. The eviction notice on her apartment door had been taped there that morning, 30 days, a number that kept echoing, aligning cruelly with the 8th month growing inside her. "Baby," she whispered, drawing a hand over the firm swell of her belly. "Just hold on, I'll figure it out." She turned the key, the engine shuddered, caught, then stalled. Rain thickened. Across the courthouse lawn, under an awning, a county worker had taped flyers to a corkboard, the neon paper bright against the wet brick. Tax sale, surplus properties, Saturday. A couple in overcoats paused, laughed at something, and hurried off into the drizzle. Sarah didn't plan it. She didn't plan anything anymore. She grabbed the box, nudged her way through the downpour, and read the list with her hair dripping into her eyes. Reusable office chairs, a lot of outdated textbooks, a broken writing mower. And then, tucked halfway down, black letters against bright orange, Cragford County, surplus, real estate. Parcel number 71, single-story cabin, Hemlock Road, Aces, minimum bid, $50. She laughed, a small bark that startled even her. $50, she said under her breath. Because why wouldn't a cabin cost less than my cell phone? She traced the description with a finger. Notes, condemned pending repairs, permanently locked interior room, no guarantee of access. Buyer assumes all risk. The courthouse doors hissed as a man left, adjusting his tie. Sarah didn't see him. She felt the baby's foot push against her ribs, and the old panic, no job, no rent, no plan, rose in her like floodwater. 3 days later, she was in a cramped room with buzzing lights and a plastic sign that read County Surplus Auctions. A bored clerk took her name and her last $60. A dozen people circled metal folding chairs. An auctioneer in a tan suit ran briskly through the lots. File cabinets, broken copier, the riding mower, a rusted trailer. It was absurd. It was also the first thing that felt like movement in a week. Parcel 71, the auctioneer said, glancing at his list. Hemlock Road, single-story cabin, permanent interior lock, as is, minimum 50. Do I hear 50? Sarah lifted her hand. 50, 55, 55, going once, going twice, sold for $50. She stared at her number card as if it might say something else. Someone behind her snorted. The clerk slid a thin manila envelope across the counter. Tax deed, a brittle photocopy of a last inspection from 10 years ago, and a brass key on a mildewed string that left a green ghost on her palm. It fit in her pocket. It fit. That alone felt like a blessing. She took the envelope and walked out into the day. On Hemlock Road, the trees grew so close they knitted a ceiling over the world. The gravel gave way to dirt, and the dirt narrowed to a pair of ruts lined with ferns. A deer watched her pass from the edge of the woods with bright coin eyes. The cabin appeared where the trees fell back. A squat, dark shape with a sagging porch, its roof shingles furred with moss. There was a blue tag nailed to the railing. Condemned pending repair. Another, old enough to be bleached nearly white, nailed beside the door. Do not enter. When wind exceeds 25 mph. Sarah parked crookedly, the car groaning as she killed the ignition. The damp smell of earth and old leaves met her as she hauled herself out. Then the unmistakable perfume of a house long forgotten. mildew and dry rot, old dust and blunted sunlight. She climbed the steps slowly, feeling them bend under her. The porch boards creaked with a voice of their own. The brass key turned in the lock with resistance, then a click. The door stuck halfway and then gave, jerking open. A single beam of late afternoon light reached through the high window, turning the dust into a slow storm of silver particles. The living room was cramped. Paneled and knotty pine rippled from years, a stone hearth stained with ash. A cracked sofa slumped against the wall under a painting of a lake. The air had that dry, dead wood smell, sweet and rotten at once. The silence was heavy, a thing with weight. For a moment, she simply stood. She was soaked with noise, city buses and office chatter and the neighbor's television and her upstairs roommate's laughter. And this quiet felt like she stepped off a train and realized the world could still be untouched, that a wood-paneled room could hold its breath for 10 years and wait for her, just her, to arrive. "Hi," she whispered to the house, feeling ridiculous. She carried her box inside, set it on what had once been a coffee table, and was now a gray slab under a layer of dust. The baby's heel rolled under her palm like a wave. "We did it. We have walls. We have a roof. We have a weird old couch." On impulse, she took out her phone and flipped the camera. Shadows pooled under her eyes. A strand of hair stuck to her cheek, and she brushed it back with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of dust. She exhaled. A laugh, tangled with a sigh, hit record and held the phone up. "It's me, Sarah. This is extremely real and extremely insane. I'm 7 months pregnant and I just bought a cabin for $50 at a county sale." She turned, letting the camera catch the slice of sun, the floating dust, the fireplace. "I'm documenting this because otherwise I think my brain might explode. If you're watching this, like and subscribe. Seriously, it'll help us to grow and you'll get exciting stories on a daily basis. And also, let me know where you are from and what's time there, because the idea that someone else is awake somewhere helps when it's quiet like this." Her voice cracked just a little. She swallowed, lowered the phone. That first night, the rain stopped and the cold came up from the floor. She found a dusty afghan and draped it over her lap. The sound in the cabin changed with the temperature. The rafters popped like knuckles. Somewhere, a drop found a pan. A mouse skittered, and then silence, so complete she could almost hear the slow grind of the planet under the throwing stars. She didn't mean to fall asleep. She woke to a sound so soft she thought it must be a dream, the barest hum threading the air. A melody. A lullaby, maybe, like the one her mother had hummed when she was very small and feverish. The hairs on her arms rose. The baby turned, pressing into the center of her. She sat up slowly, listening. The sound was on the edge of hearing, a shape more than a song. She glanced after it, drew in a breath that felt cold all the way to her ribs, and realized it was coming from behind the wall to her right. When she turned toward it, she saw the door. She had missed it entirely while she filmed and unpacked and stared at the open living room. It was narrow, half hidden by a tattered quilt tacked to the wall, the kind of door you wouldn't see unless you knew it existed. She pulled the quilt aside. The wood was smooth with age, the varnish gone to a dull, dark sheen, and in the middle, no handle, no keyhole. 3 iron straps crossed it, each bolted deep into the frame. Someone had stenciled a faded warning across the top, the red paint almost gone. Permanently locked. Sarah reached out, pressed her palm to it. The wood was cool, no sound now. Only her own breath, the blood in her ears, the baby's foot pressing up as if curious. "Okay," she said into the dark room. Not creepy at all. The morning brought a sky that was new, an improbable wild blue that turned the trees to black shapes. She put on the one sweater that still fit and her warmest socks and walked through the cabin in a new way, bright-eyed, trying the light switches, the faucets. Nothing, not yet. Opening the cupboard doors, checking the dusty dishes and the Metallica mug and the glass jar full of brittle tea bags. She found, in a drawer by the sink, a ring of old keys, all different lengths and ages, a small museum of locks that had come and gone. She carried them like a talisman as she moved. At the edge of the living room, opposite the fireplace, an old cedar chest sat under the window. It was draped with a crocheted blanket that had once been white and was now a muted gray. The top stuck and then gave, the smell that rose up, the smell of Christmas cedar and long summers, the exact smell of her grandmother's closet. She almost smiled. Inside were stacks of linens neatly folded, wrapped with darkened ribbon. Beneath them, wrapped in an old quilt, she found a wooden box the size of a shoebox, rough with carved pine cones and stained a deep black-brown. There was a little brass latch, more decorative than functional. It opened with a soft sound like a sigh. Inside were papers tied with cord. The top bundle was letters, tied with a red ribbon that had bled its color into the paper. The pages were thin and dry, written in a looping hand. A name appeared across the top of the first, Eleanor Gray, October 1931. She stood at the window while the light shifted, reading the first letter, then the second, then the fourth, the baby turning like a swimmer. October 10th, 1931. There was a wind last night so hard it made the door rattle like a man who wishes to come in. It pulled at the roof like a child with a sheet, but the nails held. I waited for him to come, the wind man, but he went on to the river and the men there and left me to my own breaths. The doctor said I should not walk into town. He said I must be careful now, but he does not know careful like we do up here. Careful is listening to the chipmunk and knowing the cat is close. Careful is putting out the dish and knowing it will come back with nothing. Careful is the crack in the floor, where you tuck the paper so no one will find it. I bought this book because otherwise I talk to myself and the house knows too much. The letters moved in a slow, loving circuit around the little cabin and the world beyond, the store in town, the gossip about the mine, the new teacher at the schoolhouse with his city hat. There was a man in them, too, but only in the dark stroke of certain phrases, a careful not naming. And there was a baby growing in the story the way a spring grows under the leaves, quietly, then with a sudden sound of water. Sarah saw the gentle woman writing by lamplight 80 years ago, hand curved over the page, listening to the wind. November 18th, 1931. I can feel him little now when I'm quiet. He presses like a bird. I carry a lemon in my dress pocket because I like to remember summer. Mama says I should not. She says it will make me cry. I told her sometimes crying makes the day go by. She turned a page and saw something else tucked inside. A scrap of cloth with a pattern drawn on it in pencil. A star made of triangles. Beneath it another piece. A triangle with a number, 4 to 3, written on it, and an arrow pointing down. The letters changed shape as she dug deeper, the loops tighter, the lines closer together. December 29th, 1931. There is talk in town that Mr. Harlan Pierce wants to take the upper ridge for a road. He says it will bring things. He says it as if the things are good things. I have seen his men. They are good at taking other people's things. He thinks I do not know the law. He thinks because I am a woman, and because I am by myself, he can come and go like he pleases. I named the little room. I call it the last place. I will show him the last place if he comes with his big body, and his clean hands and his papers. I want there to be a place where no paper can go. Sarah's fingers tightened. The little room, the permanent lock. Her eyes skipped ahead. January 4th, 1932. E says he can take us to his brother's until it passes. He says we can put the crib in the wagon and the quilt and go when the moon is dark. There is a tick in the wall that is louder when it is cold. He says he hears it too when he sleeps. I put my ear there, and it is like a little drum sometimes. I think I like that it is louder when it is cold. There is a place behind it where a girl could put a letter and never have it found. She lifted the cloth triangles from the box, laid them out on the cedar chest. They formed a star, and then a crooked path, and then nothing, until, after 10 minutes, they formed a quilt pattern she recognized from a magazine once. A friendship star with its points misnumbered. The numbers didn't line up in any way that made sense. Her head ached. She smiled despite herself. Somewhere down there in the room with the iron bands, someone had numbered triangles and made a map of something. A knock at the door made her jump. She tucked the letters back, closed the box, and stood, smoothing her sweater like she was about to go in for a job interview there on the edge of the woods. On the porch was a woman in her 70s with her hair pulled back in a bun as careful as a college essay. She wore a worn blue coat and rubber boots and had a plate under tinfoil. She smiled a smile that was plain and generous, and had been used for decades. "You must be Sarah," she said. "I'm May Carver. My husband and I used to see smoke from the chimney from down the road when the weather turned, and I figured we'd better make sure you didn't freeze to death in your first 24 hours. Brought blueberry muffins. They're not pretty. They taste fine." "Thank you," Sarah said, fighting the sudden lump in her throat. I'm pregnant." May laughed a little. "I guessed. Come on, step aside. I'm old, not fragile. I'll put these on the counter. These old places swallow a person whole if you come without something sweet." She stepped in like she knew the floorboards. She set the plate down and sniffed. "No critters, that's good. What brings you up, honey?" Sarah said the whole thing out loud, then, the way you tell a story to practice believing it. Lost job, eviction notice, the auction, the $50, the manila envelope, and the moss and the quiet. May's eyes flicked to the right as Sarah spoke, to the quilt hanging from the wall, and then the door behind it, barely visible. "You know about that?" Sarah asked. May's face changed. Not fear, not surprise. Something else. Caution, maybe. A memory that she pulled a coat over in her mind, fast, as if the air had gone cold. "I've known about that door since I was smaller than the span from your elbow to your wrist. It's been shut since before my mama was born, I expect." "Why?" May looked at her closely, as if measuring how much to tell. "Some things get shut to keep out and some to keep in, and sometimes the ones who do the shutting are not the same as the ones who do the keeping." "May," Sarah said softly, "I found letters. A woman's, Eleanor Gray. She talks about this room, and a man, and Harlan Pierce. Do you know—" May put a hand up. "I know enough to say you should be careful with old men's names because some of their children grew up meaner than the men." She glanced at Sarah's belly with something like tenderness. "You're little, honey. You shouldn't be lifting more than you have to. If you plan to sleep here, you make sure there's no draft over your bed. Never sleep under a window. And don't open that door without somebody else here." The baby turned. The lullaby rose again, just at the edge of hearing, a thread thin as a hair. Sarah swallowed. "You hear that? I hear your house settling and you hearing ghosts. Do you have a doctor in town?" "I will," Sarah said, and regretted the wildness of this plan for the 100th time. May tucked her chin toward her plate. "Eat one while they're warm. You'll need more than ghosts and letters." After May left, the house felt different, like she had activated something simply by saying hello. The afternoon stretched. Sarah read 3 more letters. February arrived in Eleanor's steady script. March brought a late snow and a bloodhound in the yard. April brought a sudden sentence that made Sarah sit up. April 11th, 1932. There is a boy in town who says there is no deed to the ridge, and that it is only the company's because it has always been. He is a fool. I found grandfather's paper. I put it behind the place where the iron goes through the wall. That place is in the last place. The little door will not open without a sound, but that is the point. A door that makes a great noise is a good door. She ran her fingers over the page, feeling the indentation of the pencil like the ghost of pressure under her skin. She went to the door then and touched it again. The iron straps were tight and rusted at the edges, installer's bolts broad as quarters. The wood around them had swelled with time, sealed like flesh around a scar. She tried the ring of keys. Each slid home in the 3 locks on the iron and turned, then stopped. The last key went in but would not move. The iron didn't care that she was there. When she pressed her ear against it, feeling silly and scared in equal measure, she could have sworn she heard the breath of a room, the hushed echo chamber of contained space, the slight hiss of air through old cracks. That evening, as the sun thinned to orange, a pickup turned into the drive, gravel crunching, and rolled to a stop in a confident line. 2 men got out. The first had on a hard hat and a neon vest and a clipboard. The second, a jacket with a logo, Pierce Development. "Afternoon," the first said, showing teeth. Friendly, the way a truck commercial is friendly. "I'm Dale Hurst, County Code Enforcement. We had a notification someone had entered Parcel 71. Best to get eyes on it sooner rather than later." The other man removed his sunglasses. He had an expression that had been handsome once, and was now weathered into something harder. "Colton Pierce," he said. "My family's company has holdings all up this ridge. You got to be Sarah." "Me?" Sarah said. She folded her hands over her belly, because it made her feel less like an animal on display. Colton nodded at the blue tag on the porch. "That should read condemned now. I can make that happen. The county's been dragging its feet for years. It's not safe." He stepped past her into the living room, looked around with a face that did not change, as if houses were all the same to him. Dale peered into the kitchen, jotted something down with an admirable amount of pencil pressure. "So," Colton said easily, "you bought this fine palace." "For $50, Sarah said. It seemed like a bargain. Colton smiled as if she'd told a joke. "As is. Did they tell you that means whatever happens in here, good or bad, is on you?" That was the size of the envelope. He put a hand on the mantel, looked at the door with the iron straps, and for just a second something crossed his face. Dislike, maybe, or a memory. "You got one of those, we used to laugh. Permanent lock. That's nothing but a suggestion." Dale stepped back in, already shaking his head. "Roof's soft. You've got a sag in the middle there. Floor joists notched funny. I'd call it unsafe for occupancy." "It doesn't feel unsafe to me," Sarah said, hearing the edge in her voice like it belonged to someone else. Dale shrugged. "That won't hold much weight in front of a judge." "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Polite rulebook says I am. But I'm also here to do my job." Colton stepped forward, nodding, palms up, a man giving good news, a cousin at a funeral with a casserole. "Tell you what, my guys are going to be up here in a month surveying for a road. I'm prepared to offer you $5,000 for the parcel and take that off your plate. Cash, no hard feeling, because anyone would see this is not a place you can live with a baby on the way." Baby. He said it without a beat, as if he had the right to the word. Sarah looked past him at the letters on the cedar chest. Eleanor's script narrow as a stream. She thought about the lemon in her pocket she didn't have, about the way the lullaby came and went when no one else was in the room, about having something that was hers alone. "I'm not selling." Colton's smile got thinner. He nodded like he'd been expecting it, like this was a scene he'd been in 1,000 times. "You take your time, but my offer drops by half in a week. Rufe's not getting any younger." Dale tore a carbon copy out of his little book and held it out. "You've got 14 days for a reinspection, ma'am. After that, I'll notify the court. If this place is occupied, you'll be in violation. You'll need to vacate until repairs are done. It's not personal." Colton got back in his truck and drove away. The quiet that followed was a different quiet. Not the old wood kind, but the quiet of a fight beginning. She called the number on the prenatal discharge paperwork from a clinic she no longer had insurance for, and spoke to a nurse who said all the right things in a voice that had curiosity in it. She wrote down the number for a community health clinic. She hung up and sat listening to the house. The thought of Colton discovering the letters made her stomach chill. That night, she dreamed of a baby no one knew. A baby that had the smell of cedar and old paper. A baby with a name that felt like a leaf between her fingers. When she woke, the blue before dawn was in the windows, and the song was there again. A lullaby tucked so far into the room next door it sounded almost like wind. The next day, she went into town. Cragford was a town of brick and painted clapboard, of the kind of businesses that last through 3 recessions and 2 wars because they're owned by someone named after their father. The library had carved newel posts and thick windows that looked like they'd kept 100 boys with slingshots at bay. Inside, the heater ticked like a faraway engine. The librarian was a woman with silver hair and a name tag that read Betty. Sarah asked about land records. Betty pointed to a half room lined with microfilm. "There's a young man who volunteers who knows that machine like it was his dog," Betty said. "He's here off and on. He'll explain the reels to you if you buy him a coffee once in a while." The young man materialized as if from the stacks, hands inked with dust, plaid shirt sleeves cuffed to the elbow. He had an unhurried way of moving that felt like it belonged to this county. A pencil was tucked behind his ear. He set a cardboard cup of coffee on top of the catalog cabinet and smiled. "I'm Noah." "Sarah," she said, and found herself suddenly wanting to explain, to offer proof of her right to exist in a place where everyone had known everyone else's great-great-grandmother. "From off," he said gently, but not with malice. "From not far and also far," she said, and looked over his shoulder at the microfilm reader with its glowing eye. "I think I need to learn somebody's sins." Noah laughed softly. "Good sentence." He walked her through the machine and the catalogs, and the way the county had once made beautiful, legible record books that a kindergarten class could have indexed, and then at some point had turned to filing papers with numbers that had no logic. "Gray, you said? Eleanor, Harlan Pierce? We have all of them in the books, as you might imagine. The Pierces built this town when you talk to the people whose last name is Pierce. Everyone else says a different sentence." They sat close at the machine, the hum of the reader warming their hands. Noah threaded the film and turned the knob, the pages flying past, and they read the early deed to the ridge, the first road petition, the mine charter, scribbled notes for fines and injuries, the first Pierce registered in 1909, then another and another. They saw Eleanor's grandparents' names once or twice, little dashes, a marriage here, a tax record there. And then, Noah slowed, leaned in, there was a note that didn't fit. "Look, 1933, land record adjustment. Entry removed and replaced under petition." "Who is this? Clerk initialed?" Noah squinted. That's a B. That's Burton Larner. He ran the office in the 30s. He drank. Everyone knew. Sarah's skin prickled. Eleanor wrote about a deed. She said she hid it. She hid it in the last place, the locked room. Noah looked up at her with a face that didn't get excited easily and now lit. You're talking about that cabin on Hemlock? The one with the cursed door? It's my cabin now, Sarah said, and tried to say it casually. It came out with a small breathlessness. And I am not super into curses unless we can use them to scare away developers. He smiled again. Well, you're going to need more than curses. You're going to need the original paper. If you can find a deed that predates the Pierce claim, plus proof of replacement, you might have a quiet title case. Also, you might have a fight. There's always a fight. No one likes to lose paper. They've been calling theirs since before you were born. She told him about the letters, about the triangle pieces, about the humming lullaby she couldn't explain even to herself without feeling embarrassed. Noah's face did something then, softened and sharpened. Cragford loves a mystery, he said. It keeps us from punching the wall. You want some help? She thought of telling him no. She thought of May's caution. She thought of the baby, a foot pressing as if answering, and how the house seemed to hold its breath. I do. Noah came up the ridge with her that afternoon in a truck with a stack of antique books on the passenger seat and a toolbox in the back. He smelled like sawdust and coffee grounds. He walked through the cabin as if listening, his hand brushing the paneling as if it might speak to him. He crouched by the iron-strapped door and whistled low. She wasn't playing, he said. This would have taken a day and 2 men to install. Good work, not pretty, sturdy. Can we get it open? We can, he said. The question is whether we should, and when. But if that deed's in there, you don't want to wait until someone takes an interest. They shouldn't. He tapped the iron sank into the wood where the bolts went through. Good place to hide something, too. If you cut the bolts and pull them, there's a channel. But I wouldn't cut anything yet. Let's see if your friend left a hint. Sarah laid out the cloth triangles on the cedar chest again. Noah leaned over them, his brow folded. Friendship star, except the numbers don't match the points. What if the numbers aren't points? What if they're positions? He rearranged them. The star became a different shape, awkward, then a different one. He held up one triangle with an arrow that pointed down. There, that's a compass marker. She's telling us where to put it in the room, which corner, which way. He lined them up on the floor, turned the triangles so the arrows pointed toward the door. He moved his hand through the air, measuring with his fingers in the way of men who were born with tape measures in their jeans. Look here, he said softly. 433122. The numbers progress, but only if you... He stopped. Sarah had her ear to the iron door again, without thinking, listening to the silence as if it might figure itself into words. What is it? She whispered. Bellows, he said. That's what the blacksmith told me, once ran this shop, when this was a shop. This house isn't that old, but the hardware is like what you'd see on a blacksmith's place. Someone who knew old work did this. They weren't playing at secrets. They made the secret and then they put a code under it. I love your Eleanor already. They found another box that day, not because they were brilliant, but because the afternoon light did a thing just right, and a square of floor near the iron door glowed a warmer color than the boards around it. Noah pried gently with a thin bar. The board lifted. Some animal had nested there and left acorns and fur. Beneath it was a cavity, and in it a small tin. The lid was almost welded shut with time. Noah pried that, too, as carefully as surgery. Inside was a rolled paper that slid out like a snake so dry it could have become dust if she breathed wrong. She put her hand under it instinctively. It was a blueprint. No, not a blueprint. Something hand-drawn and precise, an outline of the house, and the numbered triangles matched corners. And in the middle, Sarah's breath stuck, was a little drawing of a door with 3 bars, and an arrow pointing not to it, but to the wall beside it, where someone had drawn a rectangle in faint, careful strokes, and next to it, box, last. Noah stood with the plan between his hands as if he could feel the thoughts of the person who had drawn it. "You find that," he said, "and you might service your doctor bill and your inspector and your roof and then some. And fight the man who wants to put a road here." He nodded. "You have 14 days before the county calls it in. 8 now, given the day, and a baby on the way. I'll hang a tarp on that roof. You get to reading." They worked like people who had found a rope in a bad river. Noah measured, counted steps, tapped board with knuckles, listened. Sarah read letters until her eyes blurred. May 9th, 1932. I went to see May this morning. The girl who lives at the old Petty farm said that she saw Harlan Pierce's car on the ridge last night. May said I should pray. I told her I know how to work, not how to pray. She said they are the same thing sometimes and not to be foolish about the difference. The letters changed tone in late May. Someone died. Sarah thought it at first, then saw it. The line broke. The words came out jagged. A name appeared, Ruth, and then was crossed out and written again, smaller. A date, June 17th, 1932, with 3 exclamation marks pressed into the paper so deep they made ridges. June 17th, 1932. She is here. She came in the morning when the fog was so heavy you could taste it. May says she is fine. She is like a new penny. I saw her look at me and I felt a thing in my chest like the earth moving. I thought it might hurt forever to share my skin, and it did, but the hurt got new. I am scared. The men were near the ridge last night. I will do what I need to do. May, Sarah said out loud into the empty room. The house knew that name already and breathed it back at her. She took blueberry muffins to May the next morning. May laughed and said they were edible considering the gas oven was older than sense. She made coffee that tasted like college all-nighters and broke hers into little pieces. "Your hands tell me you found something," she said. "A map, the letters, a date, June 1932, the name, Ruth, and the man who wants to buy this place came around wearing an easy smile." May swore softly. It sounded like church if church had been more honest. Those boys never stop looking even when they have more than they can carry. They were in the letters then. They are now. May glanced at the door when Sarah said this, and something like affection and grief crossed her face at the same time. "I know that room," she said. "I worked this ridge with Dr. Halter until my feet didn't fit my shoes right. I held so many babies I thought my heart would bust. But that room—" She stopped. "Well, that room stayed shut, and sometimes the shut thing is the right thing, but sometimes it's not. You should have someone with you if you open it. And then you should tell it good morning like you were raised right." Leeches of gossip attached to the story the way they do in small towns. Noah asked Betty at the library about May, and Betty said, "That woman could pull a mule out of a flooded ditch with her left arm. I saw her deliver twins once in a thunderstorm with the road out and the lights gone and her hand steady as a seamstress's. She knows things no one else will say out loud." The inspector's re-inspection came 3 days early. Dale stood on the porch and nodded while Noah laid out what he had done. Tarp, shore up of the roof, accidentally undone by years, a brace here, a brace there. Dale grunted in the way of men whose compliments are spare. He wrote, "Re-inspect in 10 days, with a new date in a different column. "You're buying time," he said. "It's my job. Pierce called me 3 times a day all week. He's itching to move his stakes in." "Tell him to itch forever," Sarah said. And Dale did that thing where his mouth went like it wanted to smile and had never learned how. Noah went back to the door after dark and ran his hand over the iron. "There's a chain on the inside or a bar. She wanted it never to open without a fight. We might have to take the frame. But if she hid something in the wall, we can access it without breaking the door." The map said, "Box last." What if the last is the stump of the old hemlock, or the place where the morning beam hits the wall? He looked at her with a grin that surprised her. "You're a quick study, Nolan." The next morning, at 10:43, because the triangles had the numbers 10 and 43, and Noah said either they were there to make them crazy, or that was when the light did a trick. She stood beside the door while the sun came through the skinny side window and the dust danced. The beam hit the wall in a thin line. Noah held a mirror at a certain angle. The line bent. It hit a knot in the wood and glowed. Noah tapped the knot with his knuckle and it sounded like a lid on a pot. He pulled on his thin bar, then his thicker one. He worked so gently it looked like he wasn't doing anything at all. The wood around the knot moved. A cut the size of a shoebox resolved out of the paneling. A panel held to the wall with pins and patience. It came away in Noah's hands, dust blooming up. Behind it was a little recess. Inside was a wooden box, small, with elaborately carved corners. The brass latch was not locked. He breathed out as if he'd been holding that breath for years. Sarah felt the baby kick hard and then settle. They set the box on the cedar chest and opened it together. The top layer held a handkerchief, lace at the edges, the kind of thing that would have seemed fussy in a modern dresser and here looked like a declaration. Beneath it, papers tied with a faded blue ribbon, the top one with a seal stamped into it so hard it made dented ridges. The raised design said, Cragford County. Beneath that, land patent. Issued 1895. Granted to Josiah Gray. Ridge from stone outcropping north to black cedar stand, 20 acres more or less, as described by survey. Well, Noah whispered. There was more. The second paper was a handwritten deed transferring the patent to Eleanor with a we might as well call it beautiful script, and a date of 1932, with the same Burton Larner's initials in a different pen, but not in a different hand. The third was a letter folded to brittle squares, opened carefully, and written in a different hand. A man's. The name at the bottom, E. Whitman. He, the man she didn't name? Noah asked quietly. I think he was the man who loved her, Sarah said. The letter said the Pierce man had come. It said Eleanor should do what they had talked about. It said, I'm not a brave man and never said I was, but if there is a last place we can make that no man can get to without looking at his own face first, let's do it there. Behind the papers were coins, silver dollars that felt heavy on Sarah's palm, a tin of ring wax, and a small metal cylinder with tape across the end, the tape brittle with age and the edges curled. Noah held it up to the light. Reel to reel, he said. My dad had one of these before he died. It holds music, or words. Sarah's throat tightened. We don't have a machine. I know a person who knows a person who has one, and I know that if this has someone's voice on it, we're going to want to hear it before someone else does. They put the papers back carefully, replaced the panel, hid the box again under the cedar chest until they could figure out how to keep it safe. The deed's enough to hire a lawyer, Noah said. At least to get someone to take your case pro bono because there's a story, and lawyers are the same as the rest of us when it comes to a story. But if this is enough to poke a hornet's nest and not enough to get the honey out, we might be safer opening the door. Sarah looked at the door. The lullaby shivered again and then stopped, like a held-in breath. "My mama used to hum like that," she said without looking at him. "She made up words. They were always the same first two, and then she didn't care after that. I make up the same words now when I can't sleep. I didn't mean to, it just comes out." "What's your mama's name?" "Anne. Anne Nolan. She died when I was 19, cancer. She never liked to talk about before. She had a way of looking through you never got used to. My middle name is Willow. She wouldn't say why. She wouldn't tell me why she named me that. You ever feel like you're the end of something that started before you were born?" Noah nodded. "I was born in a hospital 5 towns over, and raised here by a man who built houses and took in other people's stray kids for 6 months at a time. He had a rule. If a kid brought a bag and a story, he was in. If a kid brought a story and no bag, he was in sooner. He used to say, 'We are all receipts for someone else's purchase.' You might be written in someone's ledger you haven't seen yet. When you say that, I believe the house heard you. It heard because you did." Sarah called the legal aid office in the next county and left messages for 3 lawyers. One called back 20 minutes later with a voice like a second cup of coffee. "Grace Patel," she said. "I used to do corporate, but now I eat corporate men for breakfast if I can. What have you got?" "A deed," Sarah said. "Something better than a rumor. Something that made a man in a pickup squint like he'd smelled something bad." Grace met them at the library with a file folder and a screen that reflected the shape of her own face as she read. She read fast. She made notes. She asked for copies and retreated to a corner of the library like a hawk with a rabbit. She returned half an hour later with a plan and a list. "Validator," she said. "We need records to match this. We need to talk to the clerk. We need to make sure the piece that says 'replaced' isn't an honest mistake that will sink us. We need to make sure it's a note that says 'buried something and hoped no one would find out.' And we need to prepare for someone to throw a tantrum." "Colton," Noah said. Grace smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "I've had his voicemail. He left me 2 proposals last year for a client who owned a sliver of land he wanted. I like a man who thinks he's hungry when he's already eaten." She looked at Sarah. "What's your timeline?" "A baby," Sarah said, "and a county inspector who did me a favor and gave me 10 days. "On the baby or the inspector?" Grace deadpanned. Then her face warmed. "Kidding. Okay. I'll get a hearing in 2 weeks for a temporary restraining order on any action from Pierce, and we'll file a quiet title. Can you come to the courthouse Monday to swear an affidavit? Bring the deed. Bring yourself. The rest we can make as we go." Sarah nodded, clutching the papers like a raft. Noah found a man 2 towns over who had a reel-to-reel in his basement under a tarp that had more dust on it than the roof of an old school bus. He charged them $12 and the promise that they wouldn't break his machine. The tape slid through the wheels and spun. They waited with the kind of attention you have when you sit by a hospital bed. And then there was a voice. The same voice she had heard in the night. The same shape. Hummed, low and steady. The same lullaby. The first 2 words like a prayer, the rest what the body made up without asking the brain. The sound of it made Sarah feel like a small child holding onto someone's skirt while the road turned to mud. And then the hum stopped, and the voice cleared, and a woman spoke. "If you are hearing this," she said, and the needle ticked, and the paper in Sarah's hand crumpled without her telling it to, "then that means my door has opened, or that someone clever found their way around it, or that May told you I was not all talk and nails." There was a dry laugh. "I want this to be for my granddaughter, for the child of my child. You are a year in some future I cannot imagine. I pray you did not need me, but if you did, I am here." The baby made a shape at the top of Sarah's stomach then, like an elbow or a knee. She put her hand there hard, as if to keep the world from falling in. Noah looked at her. He knew her in that moment in a way that made the room feel very small. The voice went on, telling a story in a way that touched only the edges, leaving space for anyone who didn't want to know all of it at once. She spoke of a man whose last name was Pierce and who wore a hat no one else could stand in. She spoke of a night a car had stopped by the creek. She spoke of a baby sleeping in a drawer because the crib was too big for the room next to the stove. She spoke of May, who could sew a girl up with her words. "I put the papers behind the iron because he cannot bend that," the voice said. "I put the rest where it will make him show his teeth if he comes for it. I never could stand a man's smile when he wasn't sorry." Silence. Scruff of tape. Then a new voice, smaller, higher, singing the notes of the lullaby wrong and perfectly. A child. Sarah pressed her lips together as if to keep a sound from spilling out. The room smelled like cedar and something else, the particular sweetness of old tape and dust heated by a machine. When it ended, the man with the machine wiped his eyes with the back of his hand like he'd gotten a piece of sawdust in there. "You want me to copy that?" "I can, for $10. My wife will want to hear that. She'll cry like the day she had our second." They paid him. They drove back without speaking. The road lines unspooled under the headlights like the tape had. Noah parked under the hemlock. The moon was thin, and the cold did the thing where it kept voices close. "What if it's you?" he said. "Child of her child." "I never knew my mother's mother," Sarah said. "Anne never talked, and Willow? Why would she name me Willow for no reason?" "You think your mother was from here?" "I think my mother made our world small enough to carry and big enough to live in, and now I'm carrying something bigger than both of us. If this room has all that in it, I can't leave it shut. I don't care what curse lies on it if a curse can lie on anything." The next morning was Sunday, and a storm rolled in from the west with purple underbellies. Noah arrived with a second pair of hands, his friend Devin, who worked with him on houses and could pull a nail without leaving a scratch. They brought a portable heater and a thermos of coffee and a bag of bagels from the drugstore that were stale, in a way Sarah did not mind. They set the heater in the living room and looked at the iron door like men looking at a patient they were about to operate on. "This is going to make a mess," Devin said, glancing at Sarah's belly. "You sure you want to be on that side of it? In your condition?" "I am sure I want to control the mess," she said, which was the bravest thing she'd said in a long time. "And I am sure I do not want to leave this house while someone else decides what to do with my door." They worked in slow stages. Noah drilled where wood covered bolts to reduce the stress. Devin held the iron with gloved hands while they loosened. Sarah held the shop light and thought of Eleanor's hands doing the reverse 80 years ago, turning, tightening. The iron strap gave with a groan that sounded like a man waking up from a long winter. The second strap came slower. The third refused, then yielded. The smell of old air bled around the edges like a story. "There's a bar," Noah said. "Inside, we can get the bolts out of the frame, but the bar will hold. There'll be a chain. It'll be ugly when it goes. Maybe plug your ears. She's going to say her piece." They pulled the bolts. The door, freed, still didn't move. Noah got the big bar, slid it into the crack at the bottom, and lifted. The sound, when the wood shifted, was nothing like a haunted house sound. It was mechanical and real and heavy. The chain inside sighed. Devin caught the edge with both hands. The door swung slowly, like a bear turning in thick grass. Dust rolled out in a wave. Sarah's throat filled with the sweetness of it, the old air that had not tasted air in 80 years. The room was small, the ceiling low. There was a rocking chair in it, and a small table, and, under a sheet, the outline of a cradle. The sheet was draped like a sleeping animal. The walls were lined in shelves, and on the shelves, boxes. A doll with one eye, a tin rattle, a folded quilt the color of sky and wheat. There was a window, high, and the line of dust under it told her it had not been opened since the last war. She moved into the room as if stepping into a dream. Her hand settled on the back of the rocking chair. The wood was smooth in a way that meant hands had touched it in one place for years. She pushed it gently, and the chair moved and then returned. And a small sound, a creak, made the hair on her neck stand up in recognition. Her mother's chair had creaked like this. She pulled the sheet from the cradle. It was white, yellowed to cream, with a crack in one rocker. On the mattress lay a blanket with a willow tree stitched on it in green thread. The willow's leaves fell to the ground like hands. Sarah's throat closed the rest of the way. She could not have said why. She could have said every reason and none. Noah stood at the threshold, his mouth soft. "Eleanor," he said to the air, "we see you. We see what you did." On the far wall, in shadow, a small safe was built into the paneling, square, with a dial. This had not been in the map. The dial had 4 sets of numbers etched around it, like the rings of a tree. The paper on which Eleanor had written the quilt pattern had numbers that could be birthdays. Sarah saw them. June 17th, 1932. Another, October 10th, 1912. Another, November 18th, 1931. Her head swam for a second. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself and felt a panel shift under her fingers. A little hidden drawer opening like a mouth. Inside the drawer was a tin of needles, a lemon as petrified as a stone, a flattened penny free from the fare, and a letter addressed in that same steady, narrow hand, to the child of my child. Under it, another envelope addressed in a different, heavier hand, to Anne if she ever comes back, from May. She withdrew the first and put it, without opening it, against her heart. Noah didn't speak. The safe dial waited. She turned it slowly, listening. The first number, the second, the third. The dial caught, then refused, and she wanted to break it open with her hands. "One more," Noah said quietly. "There's one more number. The letters had another date." She closed her eyes. Eleanor's first entry. October 10th, November 18th, June 17th. And the day the wind rattled the door like a man who wished to come in. April 11th. She turned the dial to 411. The safe clicked. Inside were the copies of what they had found in box form and more. A doctor's certificate handwritten by a woman, May Carver, midwife, birth of female child to Eleanor Gray, father unknown, June 17th, 1932. A baptism card with the name, Ruth Willow Gray. Sarah made a sound she didn't plan. Noah stepped closer. Another paper. A crisp, folded adoption record, finalized, Ruth Gray to the care of the Nolan family, 1934. Sarah stared at the name. Nolan. A letter missing an E. But people spelled things. The small mistakes of offices could turn into lifetimes. At the bottom of the safe lay a blue velvet pouch. Inside were a small gold ring, with a tiny willow engraved on the band, and a key with a tag from a bank long closed. The kind of key that opens a box within a larger box in a vault, in a building that had forgotten it had boxes. "We have to find May," Sarah said. They did not go to the bank yet. They drove to May's with the velvet pouch and the adoption paper and the letter addressed to Anne. May had a pie cooling on her windowsill because she believed in clichés and in making them true. She took one look at Sarah's face and said, "You went in." "We did," Sarah whispered. "I'm sorry if we shouldn't have." "You should have when you did," May said. "Sometimes a thing knows when it's done being shut," Some rooms are like hearts." Sarah put the letter and the ring and the paper on May's kitchen table. May stared at the ring as if the light coming through the kitchen window had changed shape. She reached out very slowly, like the ring might be a bird. She picked it up and slid her thumb over the willow engraving. She closed her eyes. "You need to sit down if you're going to hear this," she said, "and you need to eat something. I can't tell stories to hungry women." They ate pie. It tasted like everything that had been grown in the county and needed sugar, and the touch of a woman who knew the right amount of nutmeg. May spoke with her hands still on the ring. "I was 16 when I caught my first baby for Dr. Halter. He was slow and careful and had hands that never shook, and he said, 'May, you're going to be better than me because you're going to keep your ear on the room, and your eyes on the mother and your hands on the baby. You're a 3-in-1. Eleanor was my hardest story and my favorite one. That summer in 32, the ridge was full of men from the company, and the company liked to think that the women up here didn't know the law. Eleanor knew it better than anyone and liked paper better than knives. She got pregnant by a man who loved her and also had a wife 2 counties away he never mentioned. We can talk about that some other time. We told no one. She had her baby in that little room because the men were out there with the road stake and the eyes that look through a person. 2 days after the little one came, a man came to the door with papers from the court and said he had to take inventory. He would have taken her baby, too, if he could have figured out the words to put in the paper. Eleanor walked him to the last place, looked him in the white of the eye, and said he could inventory himself if he wanted. He left, and when he came back next time with friends, we let him see nothing but the front room. When they came with spite instead of paper, we had 10 women with knitting needles in their aprons. That did as much as 12 shotguns. The men left again. May wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. But you can't win forever against a rich man's appetite. Eleanor wanted her baby safe. So she set things up with a family down in the valley who wanted a baby and didn't want the company to know. She said she would come when it was safe because she couldn't stand her daughter's cries in that cradle when the men were outside. When the hardest part of the year came, the Nolan family took that baby and raised her in town. She changed her name to Anne when she was 16 because she'd never liked Ruth and because she believed in the sound she liked better. But before she changed it, Eleanor took her on the ridge and showed her the willow tree by the creek and said, "This is yours. This is your name." She gave her this ring and told her she was going to know when to take the letters out and say the old names out loud. But then, Anne wanted a life with no paper for a while, and by the time she thought she could go back to the cabin, Eleanor was gone and the door was shut. Anne came to me once, years later. She was 20, maybe. She had eyes like a storm. She asked if I remembered her mother. I lied and said I wasn't sure. I was frightened for her. The men who work with paper never forget. She said she would take her own name back one day. She moved. I never saw her again. I hoped she had a daughter. I hoped she didn't need us. Sarah had her face in her hands. She had tears on the inside of her wrists where they had blown down like rain. She had a daughter, she said. Me? May lifted her chin, her mouth moving like she was saying a prayer. Then that ring is yours, and that cradle is yours, and that deed, and that song, and the fight. I'm sorry about the fight. I would have done it different if I could have. But I was a girl with a pie in the oven and big ideas and only 2 hands. Grace called that afternoon with a voice clipped in a new way. Colton filed an emergency petition for injunction to keep you out of the cabin on grounds of safety. He will try to tie that to a motion to destroy the interior walls under danger of rot. If a judge signs it, they can show up and pull your house into pieces. I filed a TRO. There's a hearing Thursday morning. Bring what you found. May, if she will come. Bring the adoption paper. Bring the ring. Bring your belly. You have a kind of power insensitive men don't know how to argue with. I'm sorry for saying it that way, but it is true. You want me to use my baby as an exhibit, Sarah said, not unkindly. I want you to use whatever love you have for that child in that house to help a judge who sees 100 liars a day recognize what's not a lie when it's in front of him. The next day, the lullaby came again, stronger, not like a ghost now, but like a radio through a wall. Sarah followed it. It led her to the high shelf where an old 8mm camera lay under a piece of muslin. There was a canister there, too, light as dust. She took it down and almost dropped it. She put it back like it was eggs. Noah loaded it onto a projector he had found at his father's last yard sale. They hung a sheet. When the picture came, it flickered blue-white and made them both look younger and older at once. There was the cabin, new, the boards clean, the roof bright, and a woman in a dress with a small waist sat in the rocking chair and held a baby to her shoulder and looked at the camera with a mouth like Sarah's when she was thinking. She sang without sound, but Sarah knew the song because of the way the woman's lips formed the first two words. A hand came into the frame, a man's holding a lemon like a joke. The woman took it, put it to her nose, laughed, and the laugh showed in her eyes as two small crescents. There were 3 frames of a small girl running in front of the cradle with a blanket trailing. Then static. Then a shot of the creek, the willow tree heavy with green, then black. That's her, Noah said softly when the projector spun and spun to nothing. Eleanor. And that's your mother, Sarah. That's my mother, she whispered, not for the first time, but for the first time like a different kind of sentence. She was here. She was here. The hearing was in a white-painted courthouse with a man at a metal detector who called everyone darling. The judge, Alvarez, wore glasses that magnified the part of his eyes that could be kind. He listened. He made them all sit down. He made May stand up twice because he couldn't hear her, and he said he needed to hear her if he was going to sleep well later. He asked Colton Pierce to speak. Colton spoke in a dangerous, honey voice about safety and community good and roads. Grace stood when it was her turn and used 10 words when most would use 100. My client purchased parcel 71 legally and entered into possession. She has original documents proving generational ownership of the ridge predating Pierce claims. Colton's lawyer, a man with a gold tie, stood. If I may, you may not, Judge Alvarez said without looking at him. Sit until I'm done with Ms. Patel. Grace distributed the deed copies. She held up the ring. She handed the judge a printed still of Eleanor holding the baby from the 8mm. She introduced May. May told her story in the kitchen voice that had soothed 100 babies. The judge asked, "And how do you know this baby became Anne?" And May said, "Because she came into my kitchen like her mama used to, put the ring on the table and said, 'Make it plain, May.' And I couldn't, and I've regretted it all my life. So I'm making it plain now." Colton's lawyer leaned in to whisper, but the judge raised a hand before he could begin. "No, you may sit. Here's what we are going to do. We are issuing a temporary restraining order against any action on Parcel 71 by Pierce Development. The county may inspect for safety with 36 hours' notice and may not enter locked rooms without owner's consent. We are consolidating the quiet title case under this court and scheduling a full hearing in 14 days. Miss Nolan, go home and do not let anyone who isn't your grandmother in a strange dress into your living room." There was a little laughter. Colton smiled at Sarah the way an animal shows its teeth before it runs. He left without looking at the judge. He brushed shoulders with Noah in the aisle. He put a hand out flat to keep from touching him and let it linger a second longer than it needed to. The message was plain as a billboard. The days between the hearing and the next hearing blurred. The code inspector came with manners, and a man with a ladder and another extension. He looked at the roof. He nodded at Noah's talk of cross-bracing and load distribution like he was in church. "You get this done, you'll be good for the winter," he said. "I'd rather it be done by a licensed contractor, but we all know what we know, and this man knows what he's doing." He looked at Sarah and said, "You're stubborn. Good. Ground's gonna freeze early. Don't climb ladders. Don't lift wet lumber. I'll be back in a week. If I see Pierce's men up here, I'm going to have one of those days where I love my job." The bank the key belonged to had merged 5 times and changed names twice. The vault still held boxes. A woman named Yvonne, who had eyes like she had seen her share of divorces and funerals, took the key and led Sarah and May and Noah into a room with a table like a bad doctor's office table. She opened the box and removed the lid and then stepped back respectfully like a nurse when someone cries. Inside were war bonds wrapped in brown paper, the first dated 1944, the last 1962, all in the name Ruth W. Gray. The accrual made the numbers make a new kind of sense in Sarah's head. The fall in her stomach where rent used to be, where job used to be, where the number of days used to be counting down, unfurled into something else. Fear, still, but with a rope tied to the post. Alongside the bonds was a letter from Eleanor, handwritten in the same steady pressure. It said, "Paper doesn't rot as fast in the dark if the air is kept still." It said, "I wanted our girl to have a way to make choices when men stop." It said, "I am sorry I couldn't give. You the kind of mother who got to stay." Yvonne's voice was gentle and difficult at once. "We will need proof that you are the Ruth on the paper's child." May placed the adoption paper and the midwife certificate side by side, and finally, as Yvonne squinted, slid the ring across. She had worked at this bank longer than anyone had worked anywhere. In her eyes, Sarah saw a thing that mattered more than policy, recognition. She went to the manager. He came back with a breath like he had hiked a hill. "We'll place this into a trust while the quiet title is being decided. You can draw enough to handle immediate needs. I am stretching, because it is the right thing." Sarah signed her name. The pen shook. Noah put his hand flat on the table next to hers, saying nothing, making the room larger. They bought shingles. They paid the clinic. A nurse named Keisha had hands like a hymn and put the gel on Sarah's belly and showed her the heart monitor numbers and didn't say anything about the language of poverty in the way that some nurses had taught themselves to say it with their tone. "Your baby's heart sounds like a hummingbird," she said, and then her brow drew down. "Has anyone ever told you there was a history of congenital heart issues in your family?" "I don't know," Sarah said, and the phrase felt like throwing up. "We'll run a fetal echo. It's probably fine. Your measurements are strong. But if there's something we need to prepare for, we'll prepare. Do you have anyone with you?" "I have my house," she said. "I have a locked room. I have letters." Keisha smiled, and it was a complicated smile and a weary one. "You're going to do fine, and if your baby needs a little help, we can do that too. You find out your family's story. That matters more than people think." Back at the cabin, Sarah went into the last place and sat in the rocking chair and read the letter addressed to the child of my child. I did not think I would be a person to write to someone who isn't in a room with me, but here I am. I named you my own way when I swept the floor. I said, Willow, and then I said, Wind, and then I said, We. We are in a place where men do not tell us our names. If you stand at the creek and listen, you can hear the sound water makes, going over the same stones and making a different sound each day, and no one can tell it to be otherwise. I want that to be your life. You may have to know the law better than the men do. you may have to hold your paper in your shirt and your baby at the same time. It won't be fair, I am sorry. I put our girl's name on the bonds because I want her children to have a way to say no when a man says he knows better. Do not let them move the willow." Sarah traced the ink ridges without smudging them. She felt the baby roll, a slow, full movement that felt like the earth turning. She whispered, "I won't." Colton did not stop coming. He came with men who measured and drove stakes and took them back up again when the restraining order barred them. He came with a smile. He came with a frown. He came with the old county map and told Noah in front of Sarah that men like him had built these roads with their hands. Noah stared at him with a face so still it made Sarah think of the lake in winter. He did not rise. On the 10th day, 2 days before the hearing, a storm rolled in and made the trees stand sideways. The house creaked but held. The tarp on the roof whipped and snapped. The lullaby threaded the noise of the storm, and for the first time Sarah didn't tense when she heard it. She sang with it under her breath, in her mother's wrong right words. The shop light flickered and then died, and the room went dark. She slept with the rocking chair pressed against the door. She woke to her phone buzzing on the low table. A text from Grace. Good and bad. Found clerical evidence of forgery in 1933 land adjustment. Good. But got pre-hearing motion from Pierce asking judge to recuse. Bad. He's trying a rope trick. Bring everything. If we get Alvarez back, we have a chance. If not, we'll keep walking. At dawn, the creek surged brown. Noah helped Sarah into the truck with hands careful and warm. As they reached the bottom of the hill, a pickup with the Pierce Development logo barreled around the corner too fast and too narrow. Noah braked. The truck's mirrors kissed and snapped. The impact thudded through Sarah's bones. She sucked air and placed her hands on her belly. The baby tightened under her hands like a fist. Noah swore once, spare, rolled the window down and looked at the driver. He didn't see the smirk he expected. He saw a scared kid who had borrowed swagger from someone older. He watched him look at Sarah's belly and then away, ashamed. The kid didn't stop. He sped off. Sarah didn't speak. Something had changed under her hand. Not the normal roll. It was there and then not, a little missing beat in her body's metronome. "Hospital," Noah said calmly. "Now." "No," she said. "Court first, then hospital. If I don't show up, Alvarez gives Pierce the whole thing on a platter, and then my baby grows up alongside a road, breathing dust." Noah set his jaw in a way she had not seen before. He wasn't sure. He followed her lead. At the courthouse, the elevator was slow and hot and smelled like coffee and worry. Grace met them at the door like a person accepting a baton. "You okay to sit?" she whispered, eyeing the color in Sarah's face with an efficiency that felt like love. "I'm okay," Sarah lied. Judge Alvarez was back. He wore the same glasses. He looked at her and then at her belly and smiled a small smile like a man who had seen a lot and wanted to be the kind of man who could change some of it. He listened. He let Grace lay out the timeline like a ribbon. He read the forgery note. Larner's initials written by someone else. He raised an eyebrow so slightly you would not have noticed if you weren't watching for hope. Colton's lawyer stood. He was slick. He had a voice that made sentences have more shine than sense. He talked about roads and safety and progress and the community. He went on. He was good at going on. Grace stood and just says, "My client is pregnant, and this is her home." Alvarez raised his gavel like he might use it for something dramatic and then set it down. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. "Ms. Nolan, your claim is credible. Pierce Development is enjoined from interfering with Parcel 71, pending the outcome of the quiet title hearing. County may continue inspections with notice. Miss Patel, you have 30 days to gather any further evidence. We'll see you all in 2 weeks on the merits." He smiled again, a quick thing. "Miss Nolan, go have your baby when it's time and do not bring him to my courtroom until he can sit quietly through a property case." There was a laugh in the room. Sarah laughed too, and then her laughter caught because the pressure in her belly changed, and a pain started low and tight like someone's hand closing around her from the inside. She inhaled hard and all at once knew she had underestimated her body. "Hospital," Noah said again. His voice was an anchor. "Now." They drove fast, but not so fast they would draw attention. Noah sent a text to May that said simply, "We are going." May replied with an emoji that looked like a prayer. The clinic had fluorescent lights that made everyone look like they needed a nap. A nurse said the words, "fetal distress," in the measured cadence of someone trained not to feed fear with her tone. A doctor came in with hands that were calm and eyes that were efficient. Sarah lay on her side and looked at the wall and counted holes in the acoustic tile and sang the lullaby under her breath, because she refused to let that room be louder than anything inside her. Noah couldn't do anything except stand and hold a hand. So he did. He had never held the hand of a woman he loved in any way in a hospital, and he realized with a mild shock that he loved her. Not a romance cover kind. A human kind that had space to be whatever it needed to be later. It steadied him. Hours passed. Time collapsed and lengthened. The doctor said the words, "late decelerations," and possible heart involvement. He said, "We are going to prepare for a C-section to be safe." He looked at Sarah and said, "You did good making it this far. We're going to take care of you both." Sarah heard her mother and Eleanor and May and the creak over stones, and the men in pickups and the singing. She nodded. "Okay," she said, "do it." She watched Noah's face as they wheeled her away. "Stay," she said, meaning the world, meaning everything. He nodded and stayed. He stood in a hallway with his hands in fists and watched the clock and thought of a baby he did not know, and felt like his ribs were going to break from holding all the names he had ever learned. When the nurse came out, she smiled. "Baby girl," screamed like a hawk. Heart. Murmur, "We will watch. Good Apgars. Mama fine. If you go in and cry, do it quietly." Sarah lay under bright white light with her hair messy, and her face pale, and her mouth fierce, and her eyes new. She held a little person whose hair was dark and stood up in the middle. She looked at Noah and said, "I don't know," and then didn't finish the sentence because there was nothing to finish. The baby rooted against her. She stank of sweat and blood and disinfectant and seemed to vibrate with a kind of power he hadn't seen before in anyone. He wanted to kneel, he didn't. She named her Eleanor because she didn't know how not to. And Willow because the middle name was not an accident, and because rules gave a person something to hang the picture on. The days that followed moved like river and rock. Social workers came. Nurses came. Keisha came and said, "Her heart is strong and loud. We'll watch her. Some hearts make a little noise because they want to be heard." Sarah held her baby and read the letters in the rocking chair in the last place and didn't mind that the room smelled like dust because it also smelled like milk. May held the baby and whispered the names of women the baby was born of like she was blessing her with them. Eleanor, Anne, Ruth, Willow, Sarah, and the baby yawned and took them in. Noah sat in the corner and cataloged the boxes on the shelves because he needed a task. He found photographs in a tin with faces so familiar they might have been a mirror. He found a ledger that held numbers and names, and that ledger told the story in clean lines of a set of payments made and then not made, and signatures that had been traced by someone else. He brought the ledger to Grace. Grace smiled in a way that had heat in it. "You want to see a hungry woman eat?" The quiet title hearing came in 2 weeks. Colton tried 3 more legal maneuvers and then walked into the courthouse like it was a party he had not been invited to and had decided to enjoy anyway. Judge Alvarez listened to evidence. He read the ledger. He looked at the ring and the bank bonds and the midwife's certificate. He lit into the old records like a dog on a bone, chewed, swallowed, licked his muzzle. He asked questions that made the gold tie man shuffle his papers. He had a ginger candy he put into his mouth mid-hearing. He kept his hand on the paper like he was keeping it from flying away. When it was done, he took off his glasses and cleaned them and said, "I do not relish telling people bad news. Mr. Pierce, you're going to decide this is bad news. It's not. We're moving toward the truth, which sometimes costs cash. Ms. Nolan, your title stands. The court recognizes your rightful ownership of Parcel 71 and the 20 acres attached as described in the 1895 patent and the 1932 deed. Pierce Development is permanently enjoined from any encroachment. Any further attempt to interfere will be treated as contempt." I'm referring the 1933 land adjustment note to the county attorney for investigation into past forgery, not because I think there is a man left alive to answer for it, but because I think you all need to know the crooked timber you nailed your houses to. There was a silence in that room you could have poured into a jar and given to a passing stranger. It held the sound of cross generations and air finally coming in. Colton stood. He smiled in a way that included only his teeth. "Congratulations," he said, without any of the colors that word usually wore. He looked at Sarah, and then Noah, and then Grace, and then May, who had put on a dress the color of a leaf. "We'll see about the road then." Grace smiled for the first time all month in a way she meant. "You will," she said, "and then you'll stop." Sarah walked out of the courthouse into a light that made the dust in the air visible like coins. She wanted to lie down on the steps and sleep for a year. Instead, she went to the clinic and stood in the doorway while Keisha weighed the baby, and the number on the scale seemed more real than any other number in her life. She took her back to the cabin under a sky the color of a bruise and settled into the rocking chair in the last place, and the lullaby came, and she sang. Money wasn't a magic trick, but some small magic happened. The bonds cashed into a trust kept the roof from leaking and paid the hospital, and meant that when the inspector came back with a smile and a white slip that said, "Occupancy permitted, non-permanent," Sarah cried enough to make him look like he was going to go sit in his truck for a minute. She gave him a muffin. He said nothing for longer than a man like him usually does. Noah fixed the porch with boards that came from a woman leaving a barn and gave Sarah the wood because she liked babies and men who kept their voices low when other men raised them. 1 week later, they held a naming day in the clearing under the willow by the creek. It was just the 4 of them, Sarah, Noah, May, Grace, plus the baby who slept through it, and the creek that had no respect for ceremonies. May brought pie. Grace brought a bottle of something that said Madoc on it, because she had been a fancy lawyer and couldn't shake it entirely. They ate and swatted mosquitoes and said the names out loud. And this child was purchased not for $50, May said, smiling, but with a room that cost someone you love more than anyone could count. "What do we owe you?" Sarah asked, to all of them, meaning so many things. "Put a rock on the grave when you visit," May said. "Bring a pie. Name the willow in such a way that no man can move it." She did put a rock on the grave. She took the film of Eleanor to a little museum someone had made of the county that was once a gas station. They digitized it and put it on a screen in a corner where people watched it and thought of their own mothers and used the corner of their sleeve. She took 6 quilts to an old woman who mended things and said, "I pay in pie." The old woman said, "Sold," because she had a sweet tooth and not many customers who looked at her as if she was a famous painter. Weeks passed. Leaves turned. The roof lost its moss and gained a clean ridgeline. The rocking chair creaked in a way that had a heartbeat under it. The baby grew, her heart still a little loud, the cardiologist saying, "She may have a murmur that becomes part of her song." The door to the last place remained open and then shut, open and then shut. A room that was both a secret and a family room. The lullaby born through wood became the lullaby born through Sarah's mouth, and sometimes the two overlapped and made a harmony that made the kitchen feel like a church. Colton Pierce tried one more time. The county called a meeting in the school gym because that's how you do it here. Bleachers held men in seed caps and women with clipboards. Colton had a map and a laser pointer. Grace had a better map and words like easement and critical waterway that she said with the kind of care that lets them not become cudgels. Noah spoke once about how roads are nice and so are birds. He was not a talker, but he was credible in the way men who build things are. May stood last and said a sentence that made half the room cough to cover a laugh. Sometimes the best thing to do when you find a door that won't open is to leave it shut. The project failed by 3 votes. Colton smiled, but it did not cover his eyes. Sarah filmed again, not because she thought anyone would watch, but because it had become a way to speak without interrupting anyone. "Hi," she said in the cedar room, the baby on her lap, punching the air. "We made it. We are registered county owners of a haunted room and a roof and a creek and a willow with more story than most poems. If you're still watching, thank you. Like and subscribe, it'll help us to grow, and you'll get exciting stories on daily basis, and also let us know where you are from, and what's time there, because last month when it was hard, seeing the names of your towns on the screen made it easier to get through the night feeds. If you're alone at midnight, you're not. Deal." Noah stood in the doorway sometimes with his hands in his jacket pockets like a man who may or may not be leaving. He did not push. Sarah did not ask. They circled each other's lives like hawks around a thermal, rising without flapping. One night he sat on the steps with his back against the doorframe and said, "I want to build you a new porch swing and fix the back stairs and stay for a while if you'll have me." She looked at him over the top of the baby's head and said, "Stay as long as you can stand the lullaby." He grinned. "I have the song in my bones now. It isn't loud." They built new shelves in the last place under the window and put the letters there in a box that Noah made with a dovetail joint and a lid that fit so well it sighed when it closed. They hung one photograph, Eleanor by the creek with a lemon in her hand, on the wall above the cradle. They painted the ceiling the pale blue of a sky you wish for when you're sick. They let the room be both memorial and daily. They did not let the past be a ghost that rattled chains. They let it be a chair in the corner that you could sit on when you were tired. Sarah wrote letters of her own, not because she thought anyone would read them 70 years from now, but because paper had saved her twice and she owed paper. She wrote to her daughter. She wrote to Eleanor. She wrote to the version of herself who sat in the car in front of the courthouse counting wrong numbers. "Dear Sarah, who was very scared," she wrote, "you did not know that the door would open. You did not know that it is possible to be held by a house. You did not know that one person's choice to put a ring in a box and a deed behind a bolt would make a road bend. You thought you were alone. But there were women with knitting needles and men with books, and a judge with ginger candy, and a nurse who did not ask where your insurance card was. You are not alone. Also, stop drinking coffee after 3, or you will not sleep." She put Eleanor in the cradle one afternoon and sat in the rocker and closed her eyes. She could feel the creature that was her life settle. The willow outside moved in a wind no one else in town felt. The creek made its list of stones. The lullaby rose, and she sang, and the baby slept, and the light came through the window in a slant that made the dust look like gold, and for the first time since the day in the rain at the courthouse, Sarah did not feel like she was running. From rent, from fear, from the emptiness of lending someone space in your body and hoping they'd make it out okay. She was sitting. It was good. It was quiet. It was her home. She thought of how the numbers on a page had turned into a porch she could sit on, and a nurse who looked her in the eye and a judge who said her name. She thought of how you can move through a world of men with maps and how you can make another map, and sometimes the world lets you use yours instead. She rocked. She said thank you, not to any ghost in particular, but to the woman with a lemon in her pocket and a nail in her hand and a child tucked under her ribs, and to the girl who had decided to walk into an old house with a $40 rug and a tax deed that looked like trash, and to the boy who lost his swagger and drove too fast, and to the woman with a difficult smile who became a friend, and to the man who knew how to pry a board up without breaking it. And then she set the letters down and picked up a hammer because there was always something else to fix. The baby made a noise in her sleep that sounded like a creak over stones. The willow outside shifted. The last place exhaled, a room inside a house, inside a woman. Autumn reached and became winter. Snow piled in low shoulders along the fence. Everyone came up for Christmas break. The kids back from their first year at college, the old men with their hats, the people who had once lived here and wore it like a sweater. They brought casseroles because they thought any woman with a baby needed something hot with noodles. They took off their boots and did not speak of the war they had lost under the fluorescent light in the school gym. Colton drove by the road slow once and then faster. He didn't stop. Sarah did not wave. He would, she knew, go build a different road. She hoped it would be one that didn't run through anyone else's child's bed. On New Year's Eve, the river carried ice in plates like dishes. Noah built a fire that smelled like an old magazine, perfumed with pine. Grace came up with a man in a coat that was too thin for the county, and smiled more than any lawyer ought to smile. Keisha came with a crocheted hat she'd made on night shift when the babies took turns crying. They passed the baby around and she was content to go from chest to chest, gathering heartbeats. Sarah raised a toast with cider, her cheeks flushed. To last places, she said. To rooms that hold secrets until someone is ready to make them into babies and bonds and adoptions and roofs and pies. To the people we made room for. And to roads that stop, May said. And to a woman who opened a door, Noah said, not raising his glass because he was busy with his hands, but raising his eyes to her for a second that said the many things he did not say and might say someday. It was enough. Years later, when people asked how she did it, how she made a life out of $50 in a locked room, she said, I listened to the house. She said, I kept my eye on the paper and my ear on the baby and my hands on whatever needed doing. I had help. She told the story in a way that kept the parts that hurt to herself and still made it matter. She made pies like May. She gave the projector to the museum and kept one still of the lemon so she could remember that joy sometimes comes from a joke with no words. She kept the ring in a dish by the sink and put it on every morning. When her daughter was afraid of thunder, she pressed the ring to the child's palm and said, This is the shape of a woman who once said no to a man with paper and thought she had left you nothing except a complicated room, and it turned out to be everything. On a summer night at the cabin, with the last light bleeding out of the trees and the mosquitoes not yet in their full rage, Sarah stood in the doorway of the last place and watched her now toddler sleep in a bed that had been a cradle turned sideways. She touched the frame of the door with her fingertips. She did not feel haunted. She felt something so simple it was nearly impossible to write down. Safety. She sat in the rocking chair, her bare feet on the cool wood, and thought of the day she held a box with an ultrasound picture and nothing else that felt certain. She thought of the court and the code, and the men with maps and the women with kneaded casseroles. She thought of a lemon, and of a lullaby that made other rooms less frightening, and of the way the light fell on dust motes and made them gold. The house made a sound that she had come to know by heart. A long, slow settling. The kind of sound you might make after a good meal under a tree. She smiled. "Good night," she said to the room. The baby sighed in her sleep and turned her face toward the sound of the creek. She would grow up thinking a locked door was something you asked the right questions of. Outside, the willow moved. Inside, the last place went on being a last place and also a first.